Welcome back to the channel. My name's Adam Smith, and inside this GameFound preview series, very excited to be diving into Lands of Evershade coming from Awaken Realms. This one lands on GameFound for mid-November. The link to the campaign and the launch date can be found in the pinned comment and video description. If you haven't checked out my prototype unboxing, I'll place a link to it in the top right-hand corner right now. Definitely recommend you check that out to see all the components that came as part of the prototype. Everything here is subject to change and not in its final form. The purpose of this video and videos to come is going to be to show you exactly how the game flows and operates from a gameplay perspective. Now, as you can see on the character dashboards, I have two portraits already selected. There were 4 characters in the prototype. I've selected 2 of them to use. We're going to fill out the rest of their attributes, skills, and abilities in just a moment, which is all based on the pre-generated characters found in Chapter 8 currently of the player's handbook. Now, if you want to go down the RPG road and create your own unique character within the world, you have multiple chapters inside the player's handbook to take you through that step by step. We'll touch on this in a future video. For those unfamiliar with Lands of Evershade, it is a cooperative narrative and exploration board game for 1 to 5 players. Each player is going to use the handbook, as I mentioned just moments ago, to either create a unique character or to use a pre-generated one. Once you have your party created, then you set upon one of several available adventures that allow the characters to choose their way through gripping stories, fight enemies on tactical maps, and explore various areas of Evershade. In the process, the characters advance and gather better equipment to handle even bigger challenges. Each adventure takes 10 to 15 hours and is most often divided into multiple 3 to 5 hour chapters, each of them within 2 1 to 3 hour acts. Once the character reaches the maximum advancement level, which is 12, they can either embark on one of the deadly dangerous epic scenarios or find a good way to retire, making way for a new generation of adventurers. 5,000 miles stretched under the falling disk of Loadouts, dozens of kingdoms, tribes, and races, all knowing the world will end, and all too conflicted to act. Cities sprawling around the rays of light that bring doom, but also power. Mysteries of the past waiting to be uncovered. Whoever you are, whatever your story, race, or skill, one thing is certain, in Evershade, the adventure will find you. Let's now populate the character dashboards based on the pre-generated loadout found within the player's handbook. It's all nicely laid out on a single page for each character, telling you exactly which components you need to place on the dashboard. Riva's race is an elf, so I placed that token in the top left-hand corner. You'll see keywords underneath of it. I'll zoom in a second to show you those. Underneath that, we have the origin, in this case, Arcane Academy, and then underneath that, a profession, Paladin. Beneath the race, origin, and profession for your character, you'll see italicized white font keywords. These keywords will be called upon throughout gameplay and will have significant impact to how things pan out. And here are Riva's attributes. We have 1 for strength, 2 for agility, 3 for charisma, and 3 for intelligence. Divinium is a D4, which is going to be a die in orange, and move value is 6. HP for this character starts at 6. There's an experience track on the right-hand side of the character dashboard running from 0 to 14. We'll start in the 0 position. Every character in the game will have a pouch, and you'll see underneath that pouch a hotbar, which is connected to the character dashboard, and cards that are not currently on the hotbar will be in the pouch for the character. Also inside the pouch are any items that are currently not in the equipment slots. Every character in the game is going to come with its own handful of cards. These are going to be focused on offensive and defensive support. You're going to see a number of cards, differences between characters, and varying amounts from the very start. So for instance, this character has 8 cards, whereas the other one I'm controlling has 6. But at the very beginning, you have 6 slots open on your hotbar. Of course, 4 of them are actually hiding underneath the cards I've got laid out here, 2 remaining down here, and then these 4 are actually locked until we advance far enough to unlock them. Now, in just a moment, I'll show you all these cards up close, but essentially we have support reactions, defensive reactions, offensive actions, and support actions with this character. The primary thing to note is the shapes in the center on the left-hand side. They're going to correspond to the shapes in the different slots to let you know exactly which ones can be placed in which slots. Now, just before we go ahead and select the cards we want in our hotbar, let's first go ahead and get our equipment in place. Riva starts the game off with a sword, which has keywords melee and weapon, also an amulet of protection, which has keyword artifact, and below it, a mystical grimoire. Now let's populate our cards in the hotbar. We're going to go ahead with an offensive one first, an offensive action, which we have 2 options. We have slash and we have attack. I'm going to choose to use slash, and you can see it requires a sword, which we have the keyword for now, and also the benefit to slash is that it rolls agility, and my agility is a 2 versus my strength for the other card, which was a 1. Let's move right along to the next slot, which is the defensive slot here. Has to match this shape, which we have 3 cards. They're defensive reactions, as you can see. The icons in the top left, whether they're moons or those hit symbols or icons, they represent targeting effects within the game. We'll talk more about that later on. For now, I have the choice between the 3 here. Defense is all about prevention. I'm going to go with the dodge card here, which is going to allow me to prevent damage. The other one here allows me to prevent damage too, and this one over here allows me to prevent terror. Now you'll notice for the next 4 that I'm about to select, I have multiple options I can choose between in terms of shapes. The hotbar is all full, and now we're going to place the other ones inside the pouch. Next, I'm going to grab 1 fate token, 1 gold, as this character starts with a gold, the miniature for the character, and the reference card for its advancement. That's going to do it for Riva. She's now set up. Let's move over to our other character, Ralgar, and we'll just jump right to the very end of finishing that character setup. Let's populate all the components for the dashboards, and then we'll do the hotbar last. The pre-gen version of Ralgar is all set up. Let's now go ahead and fill in that hotbar. And as I mentioned earlier, different from Riva, Ralgar only has 6 cards from the very start, so all of them end up being slotted in. Ralgar is a fighter, so we have the advancement card for him. You'll see this corresponds to the dashboard for the character as well. We'll be tracking progress as advancement occurs. And for Riva, she's a paladin. She has a similar reference card, although her paths are different. She has warfare and battle magic instead of close combat and warfare. And for those interested, here's an up-close look at the paladin advancement card. I've also grabbed the reference cards for combat overview, icons glossary, and the party marker here. We'll talk more about those as we get into gameplay. Now let's go up to that story sheet there that states into the Whitewell. There's some information in the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to follow along as we head into our first adventure. There are 2 columns of information here on this sheet. On the right-hand side, it talks about resuming an adventure. We are starting an adventure, however, so on the left-hand side, the first step is placing the story tracker to the left of the sheet. Already done that. This is going to allow us to track events and decisions we make as we go through the game of Evershade. You'll see this in action very shortly. And then it says to take out character boards containing characters with no advancements. In other words, getting things set up. We've already done this for our characters, so we move to step 3, and I've broken the rules of step 3 as I've already placed out the cards and items for the characters. We're going to pretend like they're still in the pouches for the purposes of going forward here, and if we have to reseat anything at a certain time frame based on the storybook, we will. For now, we're going to entry 1 of the intro to the Whitewell storybook.
Blackridge. Seen from afar, its hills and knolls look like a thick black line smeared on the horizon. Those who live nearby tell stories of lawlessness, brigands and monsters that dwell there. And yet they're also secretly glad Blackridge exists. For one, the hill line and its main fortified town, Nightbloom Crossing, separate them from even more dangerous parts of Evershade. The hills also block some of the deadly sun that slips between the disk of Luada and the ground in the dangerous hours of sunlight and sundown. For you, Blackridge was also a promise of a better life, a frontier where one could still earn a name for themselves and make a living. And eventually, it became your home for 6 long months.
For those interested, here's a look inside the storybook at the entry that was just professionally narrated, and also down there at the very bottom it states important, letting you know that inside the storybook there is a built-in tutorial to help you get accustomed to how things flow inside this book and how the game actually operates without having to read the rulebook. You can actually just get the game to the table and start playing right away and use the rulebook as a reference as you go. An important thing about the storybook is that keywords will appear in bold, and whenever you find one of these redirections with a keyword requirement that you actually meet, you have to follow the redirection inside the storybook. So even if one person in the party has it, you'll still immediately follow that path in the book. We arrive at entry number 9, and it tells us that each player needs to find the paragraph below that matches their profession keyword of their character. I've got 2 characters under my control, and typically if you're playing with multiple people on the game table, you keep these secret in this case, but for me, I'm controlling both, so I get to read both of them.
The hardest thing for you to accept about your profession was that wherever people are safe and happy, in the rare corners of Evershade where life is good and where one would like to be, business is bad. In Blackridge, on the other hand, business has been very, very good ever since you arrived. Some first simple jobs helped you build reputation among the locals and made you familiar with a local healer, Inid. Not long after, Inid's backing helped you land your first big job, protecting a rich merchant travelling between villages of the region. You spent almost a month on the road. But then, as the merchant was already heading home, a Dracolic attacked both of you, killing the man. You barely survived, without pay and with injuries that made you limp back to Enid. You first came to know Enid during your days as an acolyte of the Order. Being one of the most renowned healers of the realm, she taught you a lot about the care of both wounds and the souls of the people of Evershade. That is why, years later, you did not hesitate when she called for your help. Enid's new home, the town of Nightbloom Crossing, deep in Blackridge, was threatened by lawlessness. She asked the Order for a peacekeeper. You volunteered. Soon you discovered you'd bitten off more than you could chew. The corruption ran deep. You survived several murder attempts, after which Enid nursed you back to health. Finally, you caught the trail of the person behind it, an important member of Nightbloom's community. You confronted the woman and were forced to kill her and her bodyguard. Then, with gnawing doubts and a wound in your side, you limped back to Enid's House of Healing.
We now move to entry number 5, which tells us that each character is going to be gaining an injury token. If a character has more than 3 injuries or other conditions, they will die, and we'll talk more about character death later on. Now, while it's bad news that both of our characters have an injury, it's good news that these injuries can be healed when resting and in various places you will come across when exploring.
Whoever you were, wherever you came from, Blackridge was not kind to you. Now, in the warm light and soothing smell of Enid's House of Healing, you may, at the very least, relax before you decide what to do next. You breathe slowly, taking in the smoke of healing herbs that smoulder in the brazier. You look toward a couple of other weary adventurers who sit in different parts of the hall. You vaguely remember meeting them on the trails or in small villages. Some look shady or foreign, but this doesn't bother you. After all, every one of you left their weapons with the grumpy housecarl by the door. Enid accepts no nonsense in her house. Those unwilling to play by the rules are welcome to limp to a healer in the nearest city of Whitewell, some weeks away, or patch themselves up with clumps of moss and pieces of string. You almost fall asleep, but the creak of old wood brings you back to the smoke-filled room. The doors of the inner sanctum open. Beyond them, you see an older woman thanking Enid and her red-haired apprentice, Leoreth. Then the patient walks away, leaving her cane by the wall. Enid looks towards you and smiles. A few irregular golden patches on her chin glint in the candlelight. She makes no effort to disguise her gift of divinum, and considering the faint glow behind her head, she may be one of the most powerful wielders on the frontier. Enid opens her mouth, as if she was about to summon you. You begin to rise, but then the door of the House of Healing violently swings open. A cold draught enters the room, blowing out some of the candles. The smell of herbs is choked out by the thick odour of blood. A cloaked figure stumbles into the house. The housecarl briefly pats down the wounded man and removes his blood-stained coat that falls heavily to the floor. One look at the gaping wound that was under the soaked garment makes Enid go pale. "Gods, who did this?" she shouts, ushering the man to her sanctum. "A rot giant, good Lady Enid," you hear the man answer as they pass before you. "Skewered me with a spear. Barely made my way here." The door of the sanctum slams behind them, and you sit back, trying to relax. However, one detail keeps bothering you.
At the end of that entry inside the storybook, you can now see the keywords in bold. We start top to bottom, and we go to the first redirection that we have a keyword for. So it states, if you have marksmanship, subterfuge, or nature, go to 12. I do not across either of my characters, but this one here, we do have battle magic for sure, and that's going to send us to 14.
You try to relax and await your turn, but your mind keeps going back to the mysterious man. Your eyes glide over his crumpled overcoat by the entrance and focus on the blood splatters on the ground. Suddenly, you feel tingling. A barely audible call sounds in your head, one that only you in the room can hear. Fascinated, you walk closer and kneel by one of the blood splatters. Faint golden wisps rise from the blood and bend toward you like blades of grass on a summer breeze. Tefenum. The man has to be a powerful wielder for his blood to be this infused. But if he has so much power himself, stopping the bleeding shouldn't be much trouble. Unless... You spring to your feet with a chilling realization.
Moving on to entry 19, if there's only one character in play, we go to 17. There's 2 characters in play, so we continue through this entry.
You're not the only one to rise up. Some other patrons of the house also noticed some suspicious details and sprang forth from their seats, ready for action. For a moment, your eyes lock, and you give each other a nod. Whatever happens, at least you won't have to face it alone.
We've now reached a critical spot inside the story, and it's telling us we're about to make our very first decision. Now, I'm playing solo, controlling 2 characters, so I get to make all the choices for the party, but there is a decision token you can see right here, and it's telling us inside the storybook right now, if you have multiple characters, you'd be rolling a d12 right now to determine who gets that decision token first. So as I likely won't be needing this as I go through gameplay playing solo myself, I'll still roll to put the token on one of the characters and then move forward to see if any gameplay impacts come out of it. Beyond this, I'll also touch on more about this token in just a moment. So D12 roll for this character here is a 1, not looking good for that one, and a 12 on the opposite side. So Riva gets a decision token. In a moment, I'll talk more about that, but I do want to touch on the fact I just rolled a critical miss and also a crit, which we'll touch on later on when it actually matters in terms of making checks, because these values actually have gameplay impacts. Just before we move on, I want to touch on the final things around the decision token for those that might have multiple people around the game table playing with them. Whenever you find the word choose in the storybook, your entire party has to pick one of the listed options and apply the rules. Some choices have requirements as well, so keep that in mind. You may only make such choices if at least one person in the party meets the requirement. The party can make only one choice. If you can't come to an agreement, you should discuss it with the other players and try to convince each other which decision makes the most sense. And if negotiations fall apart, you can hold a vote, and if the vote is tied, the owner of the decision token must use it to break the tie. Once the tie is broken using the token, then it passes clockwise around the table.
A loud rumble and a muffled, pained scream of a woman come from behind the door of the inner sanctum, confirming your suspicions that something is very wrong. You may have seconds to act.
The party has a choice to make. We can choose to break down the door. We will face a potentially dangerous opponent with our bare hands, but you will come to the rescue faster, or we can grab our weapons first. Running to the confused housecarl at the entrance and coming back with your weapon will not take long, but it may still be too long.
Enid always locks the door to her study with a simple chain lock when she's seeing a patient. It shouldn't take much force to break. You make a running start and smash against the locked door of the sanctum with all your might.
As you can clearly tell, I decided as a party to break the door down right away rather than going and getting our weapons and then coming back. So in this case, each character is going to gain a fate and a fate help card. Both of my characters already have a fate token in their inventory to start the game off, as I gave them 1 each, and these we just got rewarded right now. Fate tokens represent your destiny, your inborn ability to influence the world. They can be spent in many useful ways, such as re-rolling the dice or adding more dice to a roll. They're earned mostly by failing rolls or rolling natural ones. You'll remember when I did the roll for the decision token, I got a 1. In that case, I don't get a fate for that. When I'm doing a check and I roll a natural 1, I would definitely get a fate token. So fate should hopefully help us out as we make this roll for the very first time. It states here, roll for strength 5, which is what we're trying to aim for or be above, +1 die if we have a keyword large, close combat, or athletics. I get to choose which character makes the roll. Ralgor is going to do it because he's got a very high strength. He's got 4, which means we get to roll 4 d12s plus an additional 1 because we have the keyword close combat here. Then each other character inside the party who has at least one of these keywords can also support the roll by rolling a single die, so long as they have one of those keywords, which unfortunately Riva doesn't. As you saw prior, the strength check is a 5. We're going to be rolling 5 dice, and we're looking to get a 5 or higher on as many dice as possible, but the check specifically says we need at least 3 successes or higher. So how do we get those? Well, for every single die that is 5 or higher, that counts as 1 success, and 12s count as a crit, which actually means 2 successes. So when I got that crit earlier for the decision token, that was exciting, but it didn't do anything for me at that moment. Maybe here it will. Ralgar's going to be doing all the work here, and we also have our fate tokens as well in case things go sideways. Let's see how we do. Not a bad roll at all. We got exactly what we needed with 3 successes, which means we can go to entry 7. Now, just before we move on, let's talk about a hypothetical situation where I roll something like this, and let's say I have no fate tokens whatsoever to try and adjust it, so this is all I've got. This would be a failed roll. In this case, because I failed the roll, I would gain a fate. So seeing as we're talking about hypotheticals, let's talk about how we can actually spend fate to help ourselves out. Let's say we were making that exact same check. This is what I rolled the very first time. Things I can use my fate for is I can spend a fate to refresh a card, which is, again, something separate we'll talk about later on. You can spend a fate to prevent a terror. That's something else you can do. These can be done at any time during the game. During rolls, which is exactly what just happened moments ago, you can spend a fate to re-roll any number of your dice, including your divin dice, if you have any, which I don't at this moment. You can spend 1 fate to add 1 to the div die value. That's pretty cool. So in this case, you really could just re-roll dice with a fate token. During character activation, you can spend 2 fate to immediately gain 1 additional action. That's very cool.
The door springs open. The links of its burst chain fall like rain and slide along the floor. Before they come to a stop, you barge into the sanctum and come to a halt, paralyzed. The man who Enid caringly ushered into this room now stands above her body, knife buried deep in her chest. The twitching coils of a living golden power raise from Enid's chest, eyes and ears. As if weightless, they flow toward the man and wriggle into his exposed skin. With his head thrown back, the murderer barely sees you, consumed by the pain of the bonding. A deep wound in his gut begins to close, covered with faint golden strands. Enid hangs dead and limp in his hands. You clench your fists, ready for action.
Now inside the storybook, things are heating up. It's now telling us to start populating the hotbar, which we've already done, and also the equipment area for our character. Now in this case, I've already gone ahead and done this because I wanted to show you these things earlier, but I'll retroactively take them out and we'll put in what should be there based on our progress so far. Everything is all aligned with the storybook at this point. We have our improvised weapon here. The armor and the axe are now back inside the pouch. We also lost one of our cards over here because it actually needs the axe. And as we chose not to go for our weapons, we chose to just go right for the door. We don't currently have those right now. Riva was in the exact same situation due to explanations earlier, so we're going to set her up exactly how she should be right now in the story. Both of our characters are now in sync with the storybook, and the rest of their items are back inside their pouches. Worth mentioning for Riva, she lost 2 of her cards from this area here because it tells us in this entry to get rid of any cards that have a numerical value that don't have a B in front of it. You'll see all these other ones have a B, so they all stay. These ones end up going back inside the box. The final piece of this entry in the storybook tells us to check the story track to see whether we have a marker in A or B, which we don't. If we had, we'd be going down one path. In this case, we're going to 23.
Behind the killer and the victim, Enid's teenage apprentice sits in a pool of blood. With a pale, terrified face, she pushes her hands down on the nasty slash on her thigh. Not only did this man take the best healer in Blackridge from its struggling people, he also took a life to gain more divinum. And this is a sin no one in Evershade would allow. You charge the murderer, screaming. He retrieves his knife and steps back. Still confused by the bonding and with his wound not fully healed, he doesn't look ready to stand against you, the other patrons and the housecarl behind your back. Instead, he dives for the nearest window, smashes it open and flees onto the mud-covered street. He must not escape, Leoreth whispers, just before losing consciousness from blood loss.
We're told to move to entry number 4, which tells us to discard the Into the Whitewell cover sheet from the story tracker and find sheet 1 and place it in the left slot of the story tracker. With the cover sheet discarded, the secret sheet number 1 has now been revealed. It is the chase. You'll see special rules there in the bottom right. We'll talk about this in a little bit. There's an objective up there in the top left, and you'll also see a map laid out broken into different sections. There are 2 different types of lines breaking up the different areas in here. You'll see a faint lines breaking up the majority of the sections inside. These are passable lines. You can move through these. Impassable are the ones that are double gold solid. We now place the party model in the House of Healing slot on sheet number 1, and we go to entry 8.
With this amount of divinum, The murderer is incredibly dangerous, even though he'll suffer the side effects of bonding for a short while. You don't want to spread thin. You'll have to choose what to focus on. Saving the life of Enid's apprentice, Leoreth, alerting the town to the crime, or rushing after the killer immediately.
The chase is certainly on. We have 4 options here. We can choose to chase the murderer while also trying to shout at the housecarl to help us out. We can chase the murderer and shout at the housecarl to raise the alarm in the village. We can try to tend to the wounds and send the housecarl after the murderer, or we can tend to the wounds and shout at the housecarl to raise the alarm. I decided to be aggressive and chase the murderer and shout at the housecarl to tend to Lorias' wounds. This will take us to entry 28.
You snap the housecarl out of his stupor with a harsh command. He lunges towards the wounded girl. Then, driven by wrath, you burst onto the street in pursuit of the fugitive. The murderer picks up his pace, racing towards the labyrinth of narrow streets separating the House of Healing from the town centre.
On the story track, I'm now told to mark B and place a danger model in the dark alleyway slot on sheet 1. And we now move to entry 51.
The chase is on. With the high walls surrounding the town on all sides, you realise the enemy's only hope is to reach the town gate before it closes. This gives you 2 options. You can either try to catch and take down the murderer alone, or reach the gate before him and stop him there with the help of the gate watchers. The dark, sleepy town extends before you with its narrow alleyways, rooftops, and a checkerboard of backyards. You see 2 main paths ahead. You could vault over into the cattle pen, if you're not afraid of its panicked inhabitants. The only alternative is to enter the narrow alleys of a poor district.
So we either go after the murderer solely during this chase, or we try to beat the murderer to the toll house with the help of others in the town and try to cut the murderer off. Now you can see here it says, choice-wise, we can choose to run through the cattle pens, navigate the dark alleyways, or we can choose to cry out for help, which again will get us to place a marker on the toll house space, building up those allies in advance to hopefully catch the murderer off guard in advance. But you'll see that there is a cost to failing that check. If we fail it, then we're going to have the enemy moving quicker than us, and that of course is not going to be good. So from those 3 options, we can now see the map, and I'll talk about the locations that it's talking about. We're in the House of Healing. We could choose to run to the cattle pens. We could choose to run to the dark alleyways where the actual murderer is, or we could choose to cry out for the townsfolk, which will place a marker at the toll house, as I mentioned. Of course, if we fail that, it's going to allow the enemy to be able to get a 1 space gain on us, which is not good. With no marker inside the toll house currently, we can definitely cry out for help from the townsfolk. So in order to do this, I'm going to use a character that's very good at charisma. So we got 3 right here. We get +1 because we have the leadership keyword. So we're going to get 4 dice on this roll. Now, unfortunately, my other character does not have any keyword that lines up with this check, so I'm not going to be able to add any support die. The check tells me I need 2 or more successes in order to get this marker on the toll house and get those townsfolk up in arms. So in order to pull this off, I'm either hoping for a critical success or a crit with a 12 or 2 that are 10 or higher. So here we go. And of course, we have some fate tokens to use if we need to. All right, my friends, we got 1 success. So let's use a fate token to re-roll the other 3. All right, here's hoping for good things. That 11 is stuck in place. Let's see what we get. Oh, we got it. That's the kind of success I like to see. So we're going to place a marker on the toll house, as I mentioned. And also you'll see the special rules down below around moving an enemy, but that does not occur at this time. It does tell us we can choose another entry from entry 51. So I can no longer cry out for help as I have a marker on the toll house, but I can choose to run through the cattle pens or navigate the dark alleyways. And honestly, I want to go right after him in the dark alleyways.
It's easy to get lost in a web of small, nearly identical alleyways.
This next check is great for Riva. This one allows me to roll for an intelligence check of 9 +1 if Cityborn or Sleight of Hand. And I do have Cityborn, plus my intelligence is 3, so that's 4 dice. And for the first time, my other character is actually providing a support die as I have the keyword Cityborn with him. And we're going to need all the help we can get because we need 3 successes to pass this check. So let's go ahead and roll the 4 dice first, and we'll roll the support die right afterwards. I'm really hoping for a crit here. Come on. Well, that's not bad. 2 successes right there, I believe. What do we have, a 9? Yeah, just shy. We might be able to use a fate in order to pull that off, though. Let's see how the support die does. Do we get what we need? No. Now I need to make a decision here as to whether I use a fate token, so I want to show you exactly what's inside this entry currently for successes and failures. So 3+ successes, we go to 52. 1+, we go move the enemy and go to 52, which is currently where we sit right now because we have 2 successes, and a full-on failure of the roll, move the enemy twice and go to 52. So I'm going to use my final fate, re-rolling 2 dice and hoping to see a 9 or higher on this roll. So here's hoping, and root for me here because I need this one. No! So unfortunately things didn't work out for me, but you'll see I did get a critical fail there, and because of that I actually gain a fate back. So I take back the fate I just spent, which is great news, I guess, in a way, and we get to move into the dark alleyway, but the enemy moves now. So when we're moving the enemy, as it mentioned, we take a look at the special rules. It says if the danger model is in a space with a marker, remove the marker. If the danger model is in any other space, roll a d8. And based on that roll, that's where it goes. So let's roll a d8 and find out exactly where it's headed. We got a 1, so that's going to be the triangle space. So the murderer has run from the dark alleyways to the river, and it also mentions here if the danger model reached the town gate space, we go to 65. That hasn't happened yet, and we're also going to be moving.
A tightly packed poor district separates the House of Healing from the centre of the town. Somewhere beyond it, there's a big main street, but you'll have to use your wits and sense of direction to get there. You could also cut through the houses, but this would certainly result in tense encounters with armed, suspicious townsfolk.
We have 4 different options to take here. We could find a way to the main street. We could cut through the houses to the river. We cannot do this option because we already have a marker on the toll house. And this one here, unfortunately, we can't do either because we were not as successful as I wanted to be in the prior roll. If we had been in the same space and the enemy hadn't moved, we could have tried to tackle the murderer at this point. That would have been epic.
You try to take a shortcut through the backyards and houses toward the river, but suspicious townsfolk don't want to let you through.
We're trying to head towards the river. We're rolling for charisma yet again. This time, the check is at 8, plus 1 die if we have the keyword charm or diplomacy. We actually don't have either of those, so we're only going to get 3 dice this time, but the check value is only 8, and we do have a fate token to spend. These keywords are also not on Ralgar, so no support die there. There's 3 possible outcomes of this one of 2+ success, 1+ success, or nothing, a failed roll. So we'll go ahead and see how we do. Hopefully it's good. We got ourselves an 11, an 8, and a 6. That's actually enough right there. That's all we need to get the 2 successes to be in the best spot. Entry 54 has us moving the party marker to the river.
A small river separates the 2 halves of the town, its banks covered with sharp reeds and stinking garbage. However, its straight current is a convenient shortcut. Ignoring the cold, you dive into the water and swim downstream as fast as you can. In front, to the left, the reeds thin, and a muddy, stony embankment leads back to the town. Further downstream, there's a low bridge you could use to climb out of the water and get back on the road.
We have 4 choices to make, but the one that makes the most sense right now is the fact we've moved right into the same space as the enemy, and so because of this, we can try to tackle him.
Thrown about by the rushing current, you try to grab hold of the fugitive, but he slips away, swimming like a fish. You need to try again when you have better footing.
This enemy's not going down lightly. We have to move the enemy again, so let's go ahead and make a roll and find out where it's headed. Got ourselves an 8. That's going to be moving to the circle space. The options here are rough for me. I can choose to climb the embankment back to the streets, or I can swim toward the bridge.
The stony embankment is steep and slippery.
This one is a strength check. We're going to go with Ralgar here. He's got a 4, so I can get 4 dice there. Nothing on the keywords, unfortunately. It has to be wild or athletics, and I don't have anything on that front. Nothing on my other character for a support die either. So rolling 4 dice right now, and now I do have some fate to spend with this character, so hopefully we can pull something off here. We're looking for how many results? 2+ allows us to go to the next entry. 1 is going to allow us to move the enemy and then go to 56, and of course a full-on fail of successes is going to be the enemy moving twice and then going to 56. So here we go. Let's see how we do. And apparently we do extremely well. No need to use any fate. We got ourselves a crit for 2 successes, another success, another success. That's 4. We're going to entry 56. Entry 56 tells us to move the party model to the crossroads space. So we're in the same space as the enemy now. If there's a marker in the bell tower, which is up here, must have been part of a path I didn't take, then you go to a different entry at this point, so that not doing that. But we do have some narrative text for entry 56.
A small crowd gathered here at the main crossroads of the town, wondering what the commotion and the distant screams were about. You shout at them to get out of the way, but the sheepish, sleepy townsfolk soon block your path.
The rest of 56 is pretty wild. If we have the outlandish keyword on either character, we go to 41. If it's noble, we go to 40. Neither of those apply in my case, so we're going on down to choosing. We can get the crowd out of our way and head to the plaza. We can get the crowd out of our way and sprint towards the toll house. We can choose to wait. Why would we wait when the enemy's right in our space? We don't want to do that. Let's go ahead and try and tackle the murderer with our strength. Ralgar's going to go into this one making the check for strength, 4 dice to start, and we also have the keyword close combat, which is awesome, so that'll add an additional die into the roll, so we now have 5 dice. Support die is not happening, though, from Riva, unfortunately, but 5 dice is pretty good. So let's go ahead and roll now. In terms of what we're looking for, we're looking to succeed past the number of characters in the game, so currently that is 2, so let's see if we can pull that off, and we're looking for 10 or higher. No complaints whatsoever with that roll. That was incredible. We got another 4 successes, which is way more than enough. We're going to entry 70.
Seeing the murderer just in front, you double your efforts. Anger gives you more strength than golden strands of divinum give him. Soon, you leap at his back. You both tumble to the ground, ploughing through muck and straw that covers the town's streets. When you come to a rest, he kicks you away and jumps to his feet. Then he looks at his dirty hands and says, "You regret this, pest. I'll teach you not to challenge your betters." As you stand up to meet him, he extends his hands towards the ground. A short command rings in your ears like a word of the gods themselves. At his call, the ground rises, spewing out crooked shapes made of straw, muck, wooden boards, and golden, glistening divinum. They rush toward you, while the murderer stands back, starting to weave another spell. He truly is a powerful wielder. Now that you see him better, something in the look of his slender, harsh face seems familiar. But you have no time to ponder this now, as you prepare to face him, and his constructs that seem to be leaking hastily bonded divinum. There's a lot of raw power now spread around the area. Maybe you could use it to even out the chances. With most of your equipment left behind in the House of Healing, you need every advantage you can get.
We've now unlocked secret sheet number 2, Streets of the Nightbloom Crossing, on the right side of the story tracker. And also, right beside it, we have some enemies, muddlings and mysterious murderers. We're setting them up left to right in this order. At the bottom of each of these cards, you'll see the activation deck cards you need to find, shuffle them up if you have more than one, and place them below the card. We place a damage dial on the Mysterious Murderer, and it starts with 2 damage normally, but if you're playing through the tutorial, which we will be as I show you through combat in a future video, we're going to start with 5 damage on this Mysterious Murderer. You can see in the left-hand side of its card, it says 4 times the number of characters, so there's 2 characters, so it's going to be 8, plus 6 is 14, and then minus 5, so it'll have 9 health to go through still. Now we'll place the Mysterious Murderer on a specific spot of sheet number 2. Muddlings are up next. It's going to be the number of characters plus 1 for how many muddlings are coming out. So it's going to be 3. As you can see on the game board, there are 6 spaces with circles around that have numerical values inside. So we're placing muddlings in spaces 1, 2, and 3. Next, the characters can come in on any triangled area, so there's a bunch of different options here. If you actually think I should change my positioning before the next video, definitely let me know in the comments down below. We're now going to build out the initiative bag. This battle has 2 black tokens, 2 white, and 2 dual. Black side on one side and white on the other. For this upcoming battle, the dual tokens are based on the number of characters. And that, my friends, wraps up part number 1 of Lands of Evershade, coming from Awaken Realms, landing on GameFound in mid-November. If you want to find the campaign page link, I've got it in the pinned comment and video description. Would love to hear your comments on this video down below, and stay tuned to the channel, subscribe to check out the combat in the very near future. Thanks again for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.